maybe at the beginning, if you guys could take a moment to introduce yourselves individually. And I think what would be a great starting point is to talk about your career a little bit, where you started as CIO, and how that role has changed over the years in terms of what you've had to do, how you've had to redefine it, and what's been expected of you as well from an industry perspective. Maybe Ken, you want to start?
Sure. Ken Corriveau, Global Head of Information Technology for Omnicom Media Group. So we're the media division for Omnicom. So when I started as the CIO there, our focus was really about the infrastructure. It was focused on the day-to-day operations. I would say very quickly after that, we really started to look at data and information and how that really impacted what we did as a media organization. Today, 8 years later, probably 80% of what I focus on in the business is around data information efficiencies, driving the organization forward with new and innovative solutions.
Great. Manjit.
Hi, everybody. Manjit Singh. I'm currently the Chief Information Officer for the Clorox company. Been a CIO for a number of different Fortune 500 companies over several years. The change that I've seen is we've really moved from a traditional back office focus where you cared about the transactions, making sure the financial systems of record were up and running, your supply chain systems were available, to today we're much more about what I call the front office, meaning enabling the sales, marketing teams and making sure that we are blended within all of the various different functional areas inside the business. And that requires a very, very different skill set as you talk to your peer group. And we will talk about that, I'm sure, over the time.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Frederic Veron. I'm the CIO at Fannie Mae. A little bit like Manjit was saying, I think the CIO role and the IT role in general has changed over the years as well. When I started my career, it was all about IT being kind of a cost center and how can you squeeze the most out of it, lower the cost. Frankly, the benefit or the outcome was not really fully understood and fully integrated with the business. I think nowadays it's much more part of the front office, part of the business. I'm a bit biased because obviously I'm in financial services industry, which is actually a technology industry, just nobody wants to say it, but that's what it is. I think in your industry it's a bit different, and Omnicom probably very much all around technology as well. So I'm a bit biased from that standpoint, but it's true that it is more part of the day-to-day business nowadays, and the CIO therefore and his organization has to be really very close to the business, otherwise it just doesn't work.
I think I've heard something recently that was interesting. There's this concept of I think Chief Infrastructure Officer is really where the CIO role was. We've always used the word information, but it started in this kind of infrastructure role, and then I think natural progression was really to become a Chief Integration Officer. I've got all this mess, and I've got to kind of bring it together and get everyone on the same page. And then there was kind of this moment in time where there's the Chief really Information Officer. How do I synthesize all the data? And I think there's still some aspects of that. But now it's almost there's really this Chief Innovation Officer role. And
I don't think it's instead of.
I agree. I think you're adding responsibilities.
It's been piling on, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the key learnings that we've had, at least at Fannie Mae, is that for us to be helping the business to innovate, we have first to run the infrastructure, the right way.
It's almost like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a certain sense.
Safety and soundness is really critical. You cannot change the business if you cannot even run the business. So we focused, at least I've been at Fannie Mae for about 7 years, and after 2008 and the economy and the industry, being what it was at the time, we obviously had to resolve some of the key issue in industry. But then from an IT perspective, we had tons of incidents. We could not actually have a full day without having major incidents. We had to do that first before the business would hear us to talk about anything else.
So, actually, and maybe to play on that point, there was back to our conversation, I think in DC, it was probably a few months ago. I was very excited to learn about this whole, 80,000 homes and the fact that, there's kind of this background of what you're doing in the IoT world. Maybe if you want to share that story around kind of the connected home piece, I think.
So the idea there, and it's still something we're working on, obviously, but the concept is unfortunately due to the collapse in 2008, there is a number of folks that have lost their homes, and we worked a lot in terms of modifying, their loans and so forth to keep families in their homes. But unfortunately, a number of them did lose their homes. And so at this point, we have I think it's about 80,000. Don't quote me exactly on the number, but it's in tens of thousands of houses that are actually owned by Fannie Mae. And Freddie, the other GSE, has probably something very similar. Those houses require maintenance on a regular basis. Everything, painting and shutters and this and that and the other thing, so that their value doesn't collapse, and we can hope to resell them at the right value in the market, right? So now we're pretty much into the property management role, and we've got to manage all these tens and hundreds of vendors across the country. The idea was, could we use IoT technology to actually make those homes smarter, right? The home and the lot, if you will, so that we can actually dispatch maintenance crews in a more effective manner. So that's one of the thoughts that we have, and we're working on that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those moments where, for me, this whole concept that, there's 80,000 homes you guys have to own, or however many there are. Yeah. And the fact that, as a function of that, bringing kind of technology into that role, and being able to actually increase the value of the homes through a connected home.
Increase the value of the home, and then for us, it's also reducing the cost of operating it.
That's right.
Because at the end of the day, it's one of our largest line item in our financial statement. So,
and Manjit, I think for Clorox, obviously, there's a lot of connected stuff you're doing on the product side. So within your organization, I mean, has it been a situation where you're communicating the value of technology as kind of a foregone conclusion? People are in this, or are you dragging them along with you, or is it being pushed to you to say, figure it out? How does that kind of that play out within the organization at a kind of interpolitics and interpersonal relationships level?
Yeah, so for a consumer products company, for the most part, we have an R&D group that leads most of our innovation efforts. And as we're getting more connected with the consumer, and we're looking at what our value proposition is that we could provide the consumer with as they were using our product, our R&D group is primarily on the forefront of that. But today, thanks to IoT, thanks to all of the technology in the home, they're trying to figure out exactly how do you integrate into these ecosystems. And that's where we can come in and say, we understand the ecosystems, we understand how you integrate into those, so we can help you. So bring us early into a product development cycle so that we can help guide you and can help get you an understanding of what you could do with the technology and what ultimately becomes of value to the consumer. So the example that you and I talked about is our Brita Infinity Pitcher, which was our first IoT product. So how many Brita users out there? Brita water, great. The biggest problem that consumers have is they never know when to change the filter. Right? You get a little sticker, you put it on your calendar, most of the time you forget about it. Yeah. And water is one of those things that the taste goes down gradually, so you hardly notice it because your brain just assumes, hey, it tasted as good as it did yesterday, and that's fine. So to solve the problem, the Brita Infinity Pitcher will actually monitor your usage of the water and order through Amazon. So it's time to change your filter when you get a package from Amazon, right? So it's a great...
It doesn't mean I'm going to change it, but I think...
Well, yeah, we can't go that far. Yeah.
If it could just change itself, that'd be perfect.
It's a great example of how it's not about the technology. It's not that it's IoT enabled. It's a benefit to the consumer in a way that the consumer doesn't have to think about things. And that's really where you start seeing the connected home begin to play out. How can we push more and more products into the over-connected home and make sure that we're working with all the ecosystems? ecobee just came out with a thermostat with integrated Alexa. Good idea, bad idea, we could debate that, but all of a sudden you've got a standard device that's in your home that is a part of one of those ecosystems. So for us, it's trying to make sure that we continue to push on our product portfolio so that we're bringing more and more of those kind of consumer benefit experience into the home.
Great. And Ken, obviously, when I look at kind of the Omnicom group and I think about really the media buying side and the media operations side, I feel like a lot of your job with technology is to be able to tout how good your technology is, right? I mean, it's a...
Well, and I think as you probably have seen, we're starting one of our new divisions is all around data and analytics. We're really shifting the way that we look at the media buying experience and how we can use the data that is out there and continuing to grow it at such such a phenomenal pace, and trying to leverage that to make better decisions, not just where to target the consumer, but the messaging that we're targeting the consumer with. So, I think when we talk about, what percent of our job is focused on the normal operational things versus the innovation things versus, really the transformational things. I've seen that shift in our journey as our organization to most of the time is really those transformational initiatives that we're going through as an organization now. And it really is changing so rapidly. Last probably 3 years, the acceleration pace of change in the organization, and actually the temperature of change. I don't know how your internal organizations are, but it seems for me, from our group, that the ability for the top business leaders to accept the rapid pace of change is more so now than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. I mean, we were suggesting ideas in innovative ways 4 or 5 years ago, and it was like a committee, and it was time, and it was let's roll this out, and very extended process. Now it's like, great, let's roll it out next week, right? Let's try that. So everything's become agile. The more that the business starts thinking in that way, the more we're trying things out, seeing if it's successful, and allowing us to ideate off of that and move it forward and change the way and the pace of the business.
And what do you think the source of that agility is? I mean, did you guys use, and so if I think of agility or agile methodology, right, it's been very much touted as a development methodology for a long time, right? But everyone knows and everyone realizes that at a certain point, if the business isn't thinking in an agile manner, then agile development will amount to nothing, because you've got a whole bunch of people who are, waterfall, throw some requirements over the fence and come back 6 months later while you're doing iterations, and, there's just not an alignment.
Yeah,
so
water scrum form.
Water scrum form. There you go. or what I've also heard, which is sagile, sort of agile. So from a business perspective, how are you communicating, and how are you pushing this from the technology organization, or is this just naturally happening where people are like, wait a minute, why can't I just get a new thing quicker?
Yeah, I think it's an overall tone. It's interesting because our organization, we probably 60% of the employees are, 28 and under. That's kind of like the average age in our business.
Super old.
Yeah. So it makes it fun, but the youngness of our organization, you have students coming out of school with the thirst for technology solutions to solve whatever they're doing. So when, traditionally people were used to, here's your job, here's how you do it. Now people are coming into the business saying, I can do this better, I can do it quicker, let me Google and find a solution.
Right.
Let's download this, and it opens up other problems. But, I think that tone has really permeated across the organization, and it started as grassroots, and I think it's come up. So that has really caused us to be much more.
I'm betting the average age at Fannie Mae is not 28, but I could be wrong.
How did you figure that out? Actually, I don't know what it is, though. Where we have a change there quite
29, 30,
well.
somewhere in there.
Yeah, maybe 30, 31. I think what's driving this is also the overall. You're right. The overall industry, the overall ambiance out there, right? I mean, years ago we used to think about multi-million-dollar systems that would take years. And when I say multi-million, it's multi-hundreds of millions of dollar systems, right? That would take years and years to actually be deployed. I think people got tired of getting burnt from these projects and actually deploying something that's not necessary anymore. So they were we were doing the water scrum full or sagile, whatever you were calling that, and we realized that we were going through obviously through the sprints, but we would release once a year. I guess that's the point. So you have daily meeting and you release once a year. I guess you're not that agile, right? And that's when we started to talk to the business to say, listen, there is a better way to do this. And it was not taken as a way to reduce cost. It was really reduce risk. Mm-hmm. Just you're gonna get something earlier. You're gonna test it, play with it earlier, and you test fast. You fail fast. You adapt fast. I don't remember who said that, but somebody smart said it. And that's what we kind of sold them on. It was a bit harder on the finance part of the organization, accounting and so forth, because obviously with SOX and other regulations there, we have to be a bit more careful. But even there, we were able to demonstrate that from a risk perspective, it's actually better. Mm-hmm. So it's not cost, it's not just time to market and so forth. So you minimize your risk, you reduce your risk. And that really helped us. And we went we started this some years ago, but 2.5 years ago I measured it. We were about between 5 and 10% of our projects were agile. Okay, today I'm at 68% agile. Wow. In about 2+ years, right? Completely turned around and it was pushed by the technology, and the business realized the impact it had on the risk profile, and frankly from there adopted so much that actually it's not just in technology project, but we're trying to do that everywhere in our business.
So we're very much the same way. I mean, we've had a growth culture strategic pillar for the company for several years. And as part of that, we deployed out to the entire organization training that we called it Enterprise Agile, but it's really Sagile, yeah, to use your terminology. Sure. And we saw a lot of gains as a result of that. But it not being true Agile prevented us from getting our heads around this concept of fast iterations and failing fast. And you know, as you're developing out end consumer products, you know, there's a different context around the development of the product, the engineering of the product, and then the production of the product. And large-scale manufacturers are built around this very predictable cycle, and it's hard to shortcut it because our supply chains aren't.
You can't do agile QA. Why not?
It's a little challenging. But so what we've done is we decided that we're actually going to do a full agile program across the entire company. So every single employee will be trained on agile and agile principles. And that's actually, it sounds easy, but it's very difficult. How do you get your executives' heads, finance heads, around this thing of, hey, I'm gonna fail fast. Well, hold on, failure.
Yeah, failure's a bad word,
right?
Well, no, and by the way, I mean, and this is why I love this kind of connection of three very different industries, three folks who have been in this role for a long time in various different capacities at different organizations. You know, I think all of you can remember when disruption was actually a bad word, right?
Yep.
If you're disrupting something, it means that your systems went down. Back to that chief infrastructure role. Oops, we had a disruption, and that's a bad thing. Now we're at this point where disruption seems to be this word that, you know, board level people come down and say, well, I read something in a magazine that we need to disrupt ourselves. What are we doing, right?
Well,
so,
I think there's another piece that you know we also have to recognize, which is as there's been more and more consumerization of technology, it's moved away from the enterprise viewpoint of what technology needs to be to where the consumer's viewpoint actually matters most. So you start talking to executives about failing fast, and you say, hey, how often have you changed your iPhone? How often have you changed your apps? Have you ever downloaded an app that worked great one day and didn't work great the next day? Right? You are living in this ecosystem now. So why can't we bring that inside the enterprise now and start saying that's how we need to behave?
Well, and consumers have become more forgiving, right?
Much more forgiving.
You know, it used to be if something didn't work, you know, all of a sudden that was it. That was a tarnished reputation. Now it's like, I'll wait for the next rev.
Well, it's not just consumers. I mean, in our business, regulatory is really important too, but it's also...
Regulators might be a little bit less forgiving on that, I'm sure.
Well, no, actually, it's quite amazing as everybody's evolving, right? And I think by doing smaller projects and with smaller iteration, you have much less at risk. I go back to my risk point, right? So you failed on a smaller piece. Let's learn from it, let's change that, let's adapt. And actually what you end up doing is you end up educating all the different stakeholders, the folks that are working on it, the management committee and executives, as well as the regulators. And they're all better educated, therefore make better decisions for kind of the next iteration. So I think it's people see the value in that and embrace it much faster.
So let's talk a little bit just kind of maybe on the disruption topic for a second. Within your organization, you know, is there this concept and desire around disruption? I assume it's at least floating around, and if not in your head, or if not in other people's head, at least in your head. What are those conversations like at a management level with board, with operations, with, you know, other parts? I mean, is there a willingness to do what's necessary, cannibalize an existing revenue stream, be able to change what you're doing fundamentally and transform in order to disrupt yourself? Or are you, you know, kind of the you know, banging your shoe on the table and no one's listening? Or tell me a little bit about how that conversation is going inside.
I would say it's a bit of both for us. Depending on, you know, is it an internal process? Is it an external client-facing thing? So it depends for our organization, But the concept of disruption is something we are constantly talking about at the senior level. It is something, it's a word we use all the time. How are we going to disrupt this? I think our industry, the way we are today and the way we'll be in the next 5 years is going to be different. More and more things are becoming programmatic, which leads to technology that are driving decisions and directions. And we haven't even really talked about machine learning, artificial intelligence, cognitive learnings, those types of things that I think are going to change and shift and impact our industry. So we're constantly trying to figure out how to get ahead of that or how to leverage that or how to disrupt our environment. And cannibalizing one piece of business on the next side, you try to stay away from that, but try to build upon it.
Well, I mean, and look, I think retail is always the example, right? Retail, I remember the days of e-commerce, people were very resistant to e-commerce because, it's going to cannibalize our revenue streams, right? But in reality, it was net additive, and along the way, perhaps got there a little bit too late because somebody became an aggregator and did that and is now, a very large company, right? So if I think about, within your organization, obviously, Clorox isn't going away anytime soon, at least I hope not. I would assume that, within such a prestigious set of brands and such a prestigious organization, there are, ways that you're looking to disrupt, right? So
Definitely, and for us, we think about disruption around 3 different areas. One is disruption in the product, right? And certainly that's what I think a lot of people spend most of their time on. There's disruption in business processes, and then there's a disruption in go-to-market. And go-to-market is all about direct-to-consumer in the CPG industry today. And we're hyper-focused on that and across all 3 pillars.
That's a challenge, right?
It is a challenge, but the good thing is we have a very disciplined way of looking at our strategies. And we've got the growth culture that I mentioned as one pillar. One of our other pillars is to segment our product portfolio into fuel and growth brands so that we know that there are some areas where we're going to lean a little bit more forward than in others. And that really helps us. The third piece, to address the question around the board and the senior management team is we spend a lot of time now externally learning. And conferences like this, we take the entire management team and get them introduced to various VC groups. And you say, well, what's the value in that? Are we going to see some breakthrough technology that suddenly we're going to bring in? Well, we could, certainly. But more importantly, we're seeing how people are thinking about disrupting various categories and various industries. And that causes us to go focus inwards and say, well, what can we do? And the important thing is to drop the perceived barriers to disruption. Whether it's something like, I need to have a physical product delivered through a retailer. Well, 3D printing today allows us to basically say, if you have a 3D printer at home and I get you the right ingredient list, can you 3D print my product? Right? And that's probably far off, a futuristic look, but it's a way of thinking very radically different, not about the product, but the go-to-market. How do you get it into the consumer's hand?
Or even maybe change the distribution center model so that you don't have to ship all the way across the country, but the ingredients are local and sourced and print in a 3D shop that's next door so that they can be faster.
Exactly,
right?
and that is actually one of the big shifts. Again, speaking from the consumer perspective, consumers want products much faster today, and they want differentiation and customization around the product. Right? We're not set up for that necessarily. Most CPG companies are not, right? But we're making great strides in that. You can order our Burt's Bees product online, right? You can order our probiotics online through A New Life. So we're there, but there's still a big shift that needs to happen within the industry, and ultimately consumers need to decide, what are you willing to pay for? Today, Amazon hides a lot of that cost, and that may or may not be possible in the future.
Sure. I got to imagine it's hard to have a disruption conversation within, any kind of a mortgage company, let alone a kind of federally organized.
You'd be surprised.
Really?
It's changing. It's really changing.
That's great.
I think we beyond the tipping point. That industry really requires some overall. There's no doubt. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, we have a charter that obviously we've got to consider, right? But all the players are very open to new ideas. And I'm really surprised. If I compare when I joined about 7 years ago, Obviously, at the time, the problem was different. The problem was resolving some of the issues that we were dealing with, and it was much more immediate. But then past that, we were really, rethinking the process, talking about, how fast do you deliver a product. In the mortgage industry, it's not that fast.
Can you share one of these, transformative projects or one of these kind of, disruptive ideas?
So for instance, we announced day one certainty at the end of last year. So day one certainty is, without going into too much detail, but Fannie Mae pretty much underwrite loans that banks make to all of us as borrowers, right? Mm-hmm. We buy those loans, we securitize them, and this way the banks still have liquidity, and for us, we manage the security, and investors from everywhere in the world can invest in those securities, right? That's pretty much what Fannie Mae does. The sooner we can fund the loan, the faster the bank can actually sign off on your loan, you as a borrower, right? So that's the idea there. But we obviously want to make sure that the loan we buy from those banks is of quality, so that we're not back to where we were in 2008. All right, so we want to really make sure we understand what's in that loan. Who is the borrower? What is the collateral, what is the house or the apartment the person is buying, and make sure that it's adequate, right? We have now a number of connections in an ecosystem around credit rating agencies and other players in the industry that actually connects with the data much faster and certifies, if you will, or makes certain that the data is accurate so that we have less fraud. And therefore we can propose day one certainty to the lender so that we won't go back to them, ask for rep and warrant, what we call representative and warrant, or ask them to buy the loan back. That process here seems a bit technical there, but it allows the process to go from tens of days, a number is about 70 days, we hope down to less than 10 days.
Wow.
Okay, so that now as a borrower, you would feel the difference, right?
Yeah.
It would close much faster.
I just refinanced my house, and I swear it took 6 months just to that whole
way
process.
too much time, right? So that's how we would like to change kind of but to do that, you've got to have the right data.
Right.
You've got to be able to trust that data, so data quality is really important. You've got to have the agreement in place across the different players. Hopefully one day we can actually go towards much more what we call e-mortgage or digitized mortgage base rather than all the papers we sign. So there is a lot of work to do there. There's a lot of opportunity, and we're looking at that on a regular basis. So we're talking, at the board level. To your point, actually, we're sending the board members and our management committee members to different industries. They meet with the VCs. They look at what's out there, what's possible, the art of the possible. We don't adopt everything, obviously, right? But the idea is to look for potential opportunities. And even if we don't do anything with it as such, it opens the mind of our leadership. And therefore, they're much more open to consider new things and different things.
And on that point, one of the things that we did is we ran a hackathon, which when we proposed the idea and we did it, people were like, well, what's a hackathon? Outside of the core IT and technology people, they've never heard of a hackathon. Then when they got educated on it, they're like, well, how exactly does that work? What are we going to do? And what we did is, we brought together.
How much Mountain Dew am I funding for this?
How much Mountain Dew am I funding for it? Yeah, it was an interesting conversation, but it ended up being one of the most successful things that we'd done inside the company.
What came out of it?
We gave several teams a challenge around various product categories and segments, and said, here's the business challenge, and we want you to substantially change our direction, challenge our thinking. Anything and everything goes. And we put together people who had never worked together before. We'd put together teams that, somebody from finance was working on a product innovation idea, a physical product innovation idea. And like most hackathons, we ran it for about 12 hours. We gave them lots of Mountain Dew and Red Bull and other things. And it was the first time we did it, and everybody came back and said, when are we going to do this again? Because it was the first time that we brought these teams together and forced people to think differently, and we embraced what they came back with. It wasn't let me explain to you the 10 reasons why that won't work. Right? It was more of, okay, in order to get that, what do you need from us?
Yeah.
Right? So we engage the entire organization in innovation in a way that we'd never done before. Right? And that's disruptive when you think about that.
The first step was actually they had a problem, right, to fix, right, a problem to work on. I find that a lot of time we just do our day job. We don't think too much.
Yeah.
I think as soon as you start thinking about a problem that you want to solve, everything becomes really possible.
I think that's an important framing, and I want to thank you all very much for joining. I think there's an incredible amount of information inside of this that we can distill out. I mean, between how to facilitate the disruption, the conversations you're having internally. Thank you very much for sharing, and thank you for joining. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.